Welcome back to the channel. This is Not Just Book Reviews. I'm your host, Jeff Palermo, and I thought being the end of the year, I would do a 2021 DNF episode. And I'm going to create this as a tag and tag some other booktubers. This will be one of my first tags that I've done. So first, kind of my theory on DNF. And for those who are not booktubers or into all the lingo, DNF just means did not finish. So I will give a book, a print book, about 60 to 80 pages, 50 to 80 pages, depending, before I decide whether or not I want to finish a book or not. So there's a completist part of me that very much wants to finish every book I start. I just, all the work the author put in, all of the time and effort, this encapsulated world that he's given to me to read, I kind of want to finish it. But life is short and there are a lot of books to read. So I decided really that there's a certain amount of time I'll give a book. And it's just life is too short to read bad books or read books that I don't like. I wouldn't say bad, just books that aren't landing with me. So for an audiobook, I'll get to like 10%. If I like it or don't like it, it's done. For a Kindle book, I think it's around 20%, I think, for an actual ebook. And for a paper book, I'll try to go 50 to 80 pages. So anyway, I got about 20 books to get through. So let's get started. And I'm going to present them in order of guilt. So meaning that I'll start out with the ones I feel the very least guilty about and work up to the ones I feel very guilty about. Okay, so the first DNF for this list is Robin Cook's Invasion. So Robin Cook is a writer of medical thrillers. He's kind of like a pale copy of Michael Crichton in some ways, but he does focus on the medical community. Coma was I think his big book way back in the 70s, and they made a movie about it then, and they also made a miniseries again, I think recently. It just was badly written, and I mean, the thing about Robin Cook, which is interesting, is that the concepts are great. Robin Cook is one of those writers where you pick up the book and you read the blurb and you're like, oh, that's so cool. Because they're all kind of sci-fi medical plots. And so they always seem interesting. But as a writer, I just find him to be really amateurish in his execution. He just seems like, again, a pale copy of like King or Crichton. His characters are very cardboard. He is an adjective monster, with no shame. And just things are very clumsy. They're plotted fairly well, but it's just very clumsy. So I read it because I had seen the TV miniseries years ago. So solid miniseries. I'm a big fan of the TV miniseries. I hope to cover some on this channel because I like a long, sprawling story that actually ends on TV. But anyway, so I went for the Invasion because of the miniseries, but DNF'd it big time. Second DNF book is called Between Two Fires, written by a guy named Christopher Buehlman. And I heard Revenant Reads talking about this book, and it sounded great. The setup sounded right up my alley. Black Death, Middle Ages, a knight has to travel through, plague-infested Europe to shepherd this girl to somewhere. Kind of a, travelogue journey type quest type of novel. And I thought, oh man, this is right up my alley. There's a spiritual aspect to it that he spoke about that very much spoke to me. And it was pretty well written. I got about, how many pages? I got about I think 5% on audio. I even didn't get to my audio thing. It became very much the quirky kid and the gruff old protector. And the girl was very precocious, this young girl that he has to, bring with him. And she's always pushing him and prodding him, and he's having to be like, we're not doing that, and you're going to do what I say. No, I'm not, And so immediately I thought, man, I can't do this. I can't follow these two characters through the entire book, no matter how profound it gets. So kind of a shame, but I was really put off by that dynamic. And I'm not a, two tropes in storytelling that I loathe are kidnapping is my first pet peeve, but movies like Mercury Rising with Bruce Willis, where you have the guy has to shepherd the kid through the danger, and the kid's I can't handle it. So anyway, it's too bad because he seems like a really good writer. I couldn't take that trope. So didn't finish that one. Next book I tried, a book called The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. I'm a big Dracula fan. I reread Dracula probably every couple of years around Halloween. It's great. I highly recommend Dracula, by the way, to anybody. It's not what you think, and if all you know of Dracula is the films, you're in for quite a wonderful surprise. So Elizabeth Kostova, she was doing a kind of a historical take on the legend, and it starts out through manuscripts, and people are hunting for manuscripts through libraries, and it's being told in a very old-fashioned way. One book is a manuscript of a story told by someone else. So I thought, oh, this is great. This is kind of harkens back to the way Dracula is told. But eventually, when the vampires started to show up in the Historian, they weren't very interesting. And in a sense, I feel like she had this great idea for, we're gonna do kind of historical Dracula through research and writings and books and tomes, which is great. But then when the vampires actually show up, they were very cliched, and they were biting people right away. And there was a weird mismatch between how interesting her initial concept was and then how kind of dull the vampires were. So I got to a certain point, and I thought, well, I'm not interested. She didn't do an extra spin on the vampires as well as she did on the storytelling. So, it definitely has its charms, but I just couldn't get into her depiction of vampires. So, next book, Orson Scott Card's Speaker for the Dead, which is the second in the Ender's Game trilogy. Ender's Game saga, I should say. So I read Ender's Game years ago. I do like sci-fi, so I read quite a bit of it, or used to. And Ender's Game is amazing. I mean, I've read and reread Ender's Game a couple of times, and it's just great. He just hit a home run with that book. But for whatever reason, I never continued along the Enderverse saga. And now there's Ender's Shadow, Ender's brother-in-law, Ender's cousin. He wrote so many books in that series now that by the time I kind of came back around to Ender, I thought, oh man, what is he doing? He's just writing, Ender's third cousin's story. But I've heard such great word about Xenocide and Speaker for the Dead. So that first 4 books, which I think is Ender's Game, Speaker for the Dead, Xenocide, and Children of the Mind, are very highly touted. So I tried Speaker for the Dead, and I think 20% on audio, and I just was bored with it. It was a great setup. It was a very interesting setup. It's about kind of xenobiologists on this planet, and the idea is that because Ender wiped out that alien species in Ender's Game, that in a sense the civilization has gone the other way in remorse by saying, okay, we have to put all these protocols in place that never ever happens again. And so we're at a planet where there's an alien species that pretty much inhabits the planet, and human beings are there, but there's incredible protocols of what you can and cannot do, how you can interact. But the aliens themselves they called them the piggies, so they were kind of not interesting to me. And then the folks who were there to study them, I don't know. It was decently written and the idea was great, but it just did not land with me. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to go any further in the Ender saga. Next up was Necroscope by Brian Lumley, and this one was hyped by Michael K. Vaughan over at Michael K. Vaughan's channel. But I've also heard other booktubers talk about Necroscope and how much they love it. So I gave it a shot, and I got about 20% in the audio. And I just found it very overwritten. I found that it was interesting setup about these 2 Cold War secret government agencies where people have, paranormal, supernatural abilities, right? Great, I love it, I'm on board. But there's something about the writing style that was very overheated for me. He overwrote things. The scenes took a long time. Sometimes you're in the middle of a scene and you're like, yeah, okay, I know what you're gonna do. Let's get on with it, But the writer's like, no, he's gonna pick up a pencil first, and then he's gonna shift his foot, and then he's gonna, pick his nostril. Where it's so incredibly intensely overwritten, and I felt like that was Lumley. It just was very hyper hyper stylized in that way. So, I felt like I went through a great deal of words when I got through the first opening pieces, and I just didn't feel like I got anywhere. And then I skimmed ahead to when the main character was a child. So you don't start out with Harry Keogh, who's the Necroscope. You start out with the plot starting with other characters. Then you go back to when the main character's childhood and how he comes into his powers. And again, I thought there would have been more interesting ways for us to get to know that character. So yeah, just in every way, it didn't land with me. So I was bummed because the covers are really cool. I'll flash one up on the screen. They just wonderful 80s horror trade paper, mass market paperback covers are just like the best. So next up is Foucault's Pendulum. I got 30% into an audiobook, and it's written by Umberto Eco. And Foucault's Pendulum is touted as the conspiracy theory novel. I mean, everyone points to it. It's Dan Brown before Dan Brown. And Eco is a highly regarded medieval scholar, so he wrote also The Name of the Rose. And it's a very strange style. It's kind of similar, not similar to Lumley, but it's very overwritten, and characters are really obsessive, and they're really intense inner lives, churning through ideas, and it digresses from here and there. And so the idea with this book is that these two bibliophiles come up with this crazy theory to explain some kind of conspiratorial history. And it triggers an actual response from the group, which was actually real, right? So it's this Illuminati, all this Illuminati stuff. I don't know if it existed before Eco, but I think it probably started before him, but he took all that stuff and put it together finally into one big stew. And it's just very convoluted. And he's very erudite, so he goes into really in-depth historical things. It's kind of one of those sprawling novels where I think maybe my expectations for what it was going to be kind of didn't prepare me for what it was, which that happens a lot. And I think, okay, this is going to be a conspiracy novel with a kind of a rollicking story. And it's more like the conspiratorial digressions of kind of a quasi-deranged mind or set of minds, which is wonderful. But after a while, it grew wearisome because the story moved very slowly and the digressions very much were in love with themselves. And I thought, I don't know that I can go the whole mark with Eco. So he definitely is a very unique writer and he's an amazing writer. And I think if you like his style, you're in for a ride. And probably most of his books, I would imagine, are written in a similar way. But DNF'd it, unfortunately. The next one was All Systems Red by Martha Wells. So that's part of this now highly talked about Murderbot series, which is about I think a military robot in space, kind of space opera feel. And something about the book just didn't land with me. I think I read 2 chapters and it just felt very perfunctory. Like you were right into the action. It was very clever having the Murderbot be first person. I think it was first person where you're getting an inner dialogue from this character, which was very interesting to begin with. But it went right into the action. And I think the more and more I'm reading, I need a little character. I need a little build up before you throw me into the action. I think a lot of genre writers now kind of write like movies where they want to do that opening big set piece to draw you in. I'm more of a fan of being drawn in slowly by a really interesting character and like a thread start to pull me into your plot. I don't really like books that start out wham bang. Wow, what an action set piece when I don't know who the characters are or what the book's about. It's getting huge reviews on YouTube, and I think they're going to make something out of it, a streaming show of some kind. But did not land with me, so there's that. Next up was Smilla's Sense of Snow by author Peter Hoeg. I've been meaning to get to Smilla's Sense of Snow for a long time. It's touted as being a kind of one of those Nordic thrillers, but with the underlying idea that he goes through the history of philosophy in the chapters or in the books. So that interested me greatly. I thought I know very little about philosophy. But it was dark, bleak, and just, impenetrable. I just felt the tone of the author's voice was so dark. And I don't really like, kind of nihilistic, uber dark writing. To me, it's kind of a conceit. It's like, there's a little sunshine in everything, man, So Yeah, it was a little too just dour for my taste, and obviously it's that part of the world. It's kind of the tone of a lot of fiction and TV. Some of it, which I do like, but this one for whatever reason didn't land. So I didn't get too far in, and that was that. So the next book was from author Jeffrey Archer, and my dad had read this book and loved it. I don't know if he read any more Jeffrey Arthur's, but it's called Not a Penny More. And the conceit of the book is that something happens to some character. He's ruined by another character, and he's ruined for a certain massive sum of money. And I think the idea is that he's going to get back at the person who ruined him for the exact same amount of money, not a penny more. And I thought, well, that's clever. I'm in. Okay. But it was written in kind of an older style. I think it was more of a 70s, 80s. It reminded me of Robert Ludlum very much, which is also on this list. But uh, I think there were four main characters in the book, and the whole first chunk of the book is him writing the history of these characters because he wants to, he's laying out the way he writes. It's really like he lays out entire lives of characters and their interactions and kind of how this plays into, I guess, when the story will start. But it was character after character with these long stories, but they were written in a way that was kind of like, didn't feel incredibly authentic to me. It's as an adult too with Robert Ludlum. When I go and I read Ludlum again, I'm like, boy, I used to think he was the bee's knees. But there's a certain kind of thriller writer in the 70s where they would write a lot about a character. He was, the birth. They would go through the whole character's life, and for one reason, it used to be very authentic to me. Like, wow, this is a really full-fleshed character. But with Jeffrey Archer, none of it felt real, and it just really felt like he was sketching out these paper-thin characters to kind of get on with his story. And I don't know. So, but I think the second little biography of characters, I was like, I can't read two more of these. I'm not interested in these people. I feel like he's setting me up for the story, but it was a little much to read. So yeah, so I DNF'd Lord Archer. I think he's been made a commander of the British Empire now. Anyway, my next one is Much Guilt, Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way Comes. Okay, Much Guilt. And I know what you're saying out there, right? It's Bradbury, right? And I like Ray Bradbury. I read The Illustrated Man years ago, and The Long Rain is one of my favorite short stories of all time. I love The Long Rain. I tried to get into this book. Stephen King touts it. Everyone touts it as like, oh, this is this great horror novel. You must read it. But I found his style incredibly overheated. It was not the style that I remember from The Illustrated Man. This is a very different Ray Bradbury in this book. And I wanted to read an example because I also want to ask the BookTube community to recommend some other Ray Bradbury. But first of all, he's one of those writers who uses a lot of one-sentence paragraphs. And that's another pet peeve of mine when reading it. I am a guy who loathes the one-sentence paragraph. It's just, I don't like that style. You could be the greatest writer in the world, but if there's a page of one sentences, there's a certain, again, overheatedness quality to that. Like you're trying to be too dramatic. Like you're overacting in a sense. Like, tell the story. I'm with you. You don't have to new paragraph me. So I just wanted to read a brief thing about, I think when I got to this point, I think 80 pages in. So you can see even here, like all of the one sentence paragraphs that are there, right? So here's the beginning of the chapter. The sun rose yellow as a lemon. New paragraph. The sky was round and blue. New paragraph. The birds looped clear water songs in the air. New paragraph. Will and Jim leaned from their windows. New paragraph. Nothing had changed. New paragraph. Except the look in Jim's eyes. New paragraph. Last night, said Will. Did or didn't it happen? New paragraph. They both gazed towards the far meadows. New paragraph. The air was sweet as syrup. They could find no shadows anywhere, even under trees. So it's like, Ray, relax, just tell the story. And I love poetry. I mean, some of these lines are beautiful. Some of them are strangely banal. The sky was rounded blue. The sun rose yellow as a lemon. All right, but I don't mind poetic, effusive language. I appreciate it very much. I just read The English Patient. I think it was this year. And my God, one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. Wonderful, evocative, beautiful language, very poetic. But this just seems I don't know, poetry written by a really enthusiastic 15-year-old. So I DNF'd it. So anyway, but I am curious because the Martian Chronicles obviously is very well regarded. I don't know how much well it holds up. I've never read it. But if there are Bradbury fans out there, please leave in the comments, you know, where someone who likes The Illustrated Man and doesn't like this, where do I go next? So anyway, so that ends part one of this 2021 DNF. I'm going to do subsequent sections. I don't know if I'm going to do 3 parts or 2 parts. But anyway, I'm very excited to finish this. And even at the end of this first part, I would like to tag some booktubers that I really like. Revenant Reads, I'm tagging you. Michael K. Vaughan, I'm tagging you. And the Rambling Raconteur, I'm also tagging you. I want to hear about your 2021 DNFs. Thanks for listening.